intro and bits.
Alamogordo, New Mexico. A small town, about 30,000 people, but it seems to attract more than its fair share of strange occurrences. It's right around the corner from where they tested the first atomic bomb. It's also the gravesite of Ham, the first chimpanzee and really the first American to go into space. And it's the place where this guy broke the land speed record in a rocket sled, which is cool, but also kind of strange. Despite all of this, the thing that Alamogordo is best known for is its landfill, the dump. Because supposedly, that's where Atari buried E.T., the worst video game of all time.
It's been described as the worst video game ever, E.T. for Atari.
Today, we're going to talk about the worst of the worst.
Here's our top 10 worst games ever.
E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial.
Now here's the thing about E.T. It's widely regarded as the worst video game of all time.
We have this myth or this legend of something that happened 40 years ago.
Son of a bitch, get out of the fucking hole.
If you grab a piece of the phone, the FBI agent keeps attacking you. If you take a step in any direction, you fall into a hole. And if you get out of the hole, you fall right back down.
One of the major design flaws of the game was that E.T. fell into pits.
Damn it. Shit. Oh, come on.
And guess what? It now lives out its days in a landfill.
It's rumored that decades ago, truckloads of that game were dumped in the Alamogordo landfill.
The idea that they had so many of these things and they were so unable to sell them, give them away or whatever, they literally had to drive them out into the middle of the desert and bury them like a dead gangster. It's almost too crazy to be believed.
I think it's kind of silly because it's urban legend. It's just a great story, I think.
I believe that this story endures because the adults just don't get it. And that's satisfying to the young people.
Whenever you look at what the reasons are for it, nothing makes sense. What drove someone to need to hide this stuff so intensely?
When I was 5 years old, Pong came out, and my dad got it for me and my brother and sister. When the Atari 2600 came out, Atari! I got every cartridge I could get my hands on. I played it constantly. Atari was like Xbox and PlayStation rolled into one. It had an 80% market share, and the 2600 was its killer app. Adventure was probably my favorite game on the 2600. I spent 3 weeks sitting in front of my TV trying to find the first Easter egg ever hidden in a video game. It looks kind of stupid now. You were just a block who picked up an invisible dot and carried it into the special room to discover the programmer's name. But to me, finding that hidden screen was like a revelation. As an adult, I still play a lot of video games, but I also write and direct movies. That's my job. I've worked on a lot of big comic book movies, the kind they make shitty video games out of, and I even wrote some of the shitty video games. But I'm also fascinated by myths and urban legends. In fact, 10 years ago, me and this guy Werner Herzog went to Scotland to find the Loch Ness Monster. We never did find Nessie, but I still love an adventure, especially to unravel an urban legend. Today, video games are everywhere, so it might be hard to understand my generation's obsession with Atari. But for us, it was the gateway drug to a lifelong addiction to video games. And then one day, it was just gone. Sometime in the mid-'80s, it just disappeared, and there were no more Atari games. And I always wondered what happened. Where did it go? So this is the famous landfill, the burial, the final resting ground of E.T.
Yeah, this is the place. This road here, this gate, this is exactly the way the Ataris would have came through that ditch and up through here. It was the only access in. Back in those days, it was just pure desert.
And is there any way to get through this, or I mean...
Well, yeah, it's a high security gate. So,
tuck under, yeah, I guess that works.
Joe Landowski has been the garbage guru, if you will, for a number of years. He operated various waste disposal companies within Alamogordo and Otero County. And when it comes to the Atari graveyard, I believe he probably has more direct knowledge than anybody else.
Joe's the guy that's advising the city and telling the city where everything is. And I think that he's the only guy that might be able to walk out to that dump and point to a spot on the ground and say, this is where it's at.
So this whole area, this is where it's buried?
Some people don't believe it's there, but trust me, it's there.
You can kind of feel it, right? Is that just me?
It's pretty much you.
It's just me. So what are these little boxes here?
Each one of those boxes represent where garbage is.
I see. Someone would write down, oh, that's where we put the Atari trash, that's where we put,
No, that's the problem. Nobody did. We do today.
So it's like looking for a haystack in a pile of haystacks.
Pretty much.
And then looking for the needle inside that haystack.
And find the needle
so it's
inside.
2 levels.
This picture here is actually out of an old El Paso Times article. This is actually that day in that event and when it actually occurred. So what we did is just to figure out, okay, if this reporter took this picture here, then the reporter had to be standing somewhere in this area. So here's the 2 cells that we pinned it down to now. So when you come back here and put the reporter taking the picture and you make that line, and what you're looking for is to make sure the line intersects with the buildings.
Joe Lewandowski wasn't just a guy who knew his way around a dump. He was also an amateur archaeologist, kind of like Indiana Jones, but without the gun or the whip. See, the newspaper photo was like the medallion, and Joe had used it to construct his own version of the Staff of Ra, and that pinpointed the location of the Atari dump, which is exactly how Indy would have done it. Joe was clearly obsessed. He believed in the legend. He'd spent over 3 years constructing a plan to dig up the landfill and prove it to the world. But he wasn't a gamer. He wasn't trying to find out why. And that's what I wanted to know. Why would the company I love so much decide to bury its future?
The whole E.T. story is a very small part of the Atari story. Let me go back a second and explain how Atari started out.
The video game came because of a convergence of me working at an amusement park summers while pursuing an engineering degree at the University of Utah. I knew the economics of the coin-operated game business. They made a lot of money.
Nolan designed these incredibly elegant circuits, put together in a way that's so clever that modern engineers have a hard time understanding and repairing these things.
My partner and I, Ted Dabney, started working on a ping pong game. By the end of '72, we did $3.5 million. And then we did 19 million, and then we did 35 million. It was a hockey stick.
This electronic medium, which was just beginning, had some traction with people. And once you played some of the more sophisticated arcade games of the day and understood that maybe there was a chance you could duplicate that in a home game, your eyes got big.
Home video games have been a success from the moment a company called Atari launched this basic game, Pong, which has been imitated by at least 40 other manufacturers. They're selling like crazy. 300,000 last year. This year, 3 million. Next year, 6, maybe 10 million.
We felt, well, maybe this is the time to sell to a company with deep pockets.
I was in my office at Warner in 1976. The phone rang, and it was a guy named Gordy Crawford, and he asked the question I've never forgotten. Would you guys be interested in acquiring a technology-based, fast-growing entertainment company? And I said yes. I didn't know what I said yes to, but I said yes. And that led to my introduction to Atari.
Atari, where the future comes from.
What excited me about Atari wasn't Pong, it was the chipset that led to the Atari 2600. Pong was sort of, okay, you bang up and back and up and back. But this meant you could constantly change the games, and that was a very exciting idea to me. We introduced the 2600 in 1977 with 9 cartridges. The home video game was a very close approximation of the coin-op experience.
It changed the mindset of the world.
Turning the television from a passive medium into an active medium, that was what we knew we were doing, and that was super exciting to be the pioneers in that field. It just blew people away.
Nobody knew any of this stuff. They made it up as they went, and they were good at it, and it started everything.
It was playing those games that taught people the potential of a computer. Atari, at some level, brought the computer revolution.
They started experimentally hiring smart kids with this idea that maybe they could come up with other stuff to do. And they inadvertently were trying to create the job of game designer.
Microprocessor real-time control programming is just where it's at. So there's two kinds of things you could typically do with that in the early 1980s. You can do missile guidance systems, or like we say, kill people for 12 cents a head. Or you can make video games, which I thought was a much better application for the whole thing.
What went on at Atari from the very beginning was basically that the engineers are going to drive this company, because they weren't just engineers, they were creative guys. They're like musicians or movie directors. They're artists.
Through luck or providence or both, they ended up with this department of game designers that became this dream team at Atari. These guys who made all of these classics, Tempest and Asteroids and Centipede and Gauntlet and, you know, think of a game.
The culture was these guys do what they want to do. One day I was standing at the men's room at a urinal and I looked down and I saw a pair of bare feet next to me. And I looked, and here is a guy wearing a pair of shorts and nothing else. And I said something, and they said, oh yeah, that's so-and-so, he's a great engineer. He doesn't like to wear clothes. The coin-op engineers at Atari, they were great. And on the consumer side, Howard was one of the best programmers. He was one of the best of those engineers.
At the heart of the creative process is the programmer.
I try to create basically a sensory experience that evokes a certain feeling in the user. I mean, I tend to program from a concept.
I mean, I was made for this. I mean, this was what I was made to do. January 11th, 1981, I showed up for my first day of work as a game programmer at Atari.
So do you remember the first day you showed up here?
Absolutely. My first office mates were Todd Fry and Rob Zadibble. And I had an understanding that there was a lot of dope that was smoked at Atari when we were there. And so on my first day at work, I brought a joint because I didn't want to be, you know, I wanted to be a courteous guest. And so I showed up.
Which, by the way, this is a good lesson for our younger viewers. If people are doing drugs, bring your own so you fit in.
Todd walks in, shuts the door, and says, I'm going to get high in here, so if you don't want to be around this, you better leave. No, actually here. I said, I brought a joint. And he sort of looked at me and he went, I'm going to smoke some real stuff, okay? That was my introduction. That was my first day at work.
We wanted people who worked hard and yet had fun at doing it. How do we mix up so that we don't know the difference between our work and our play?
The company's motto was, we take fun seriously, but we used to say, we take fun intravenously. And they didn't like that very much.
No, I don't know why.
The party atmosphere was actually a calculated plan to incentivize. I would set quotas. If the quotas were met, I'd throw a kegger.
They would just roll out in a car, go to a liquor store, and they gave someone a company credit card, and they came back with a bunch of booze, and we consumed it. Over there is where the hot tub was, inside on the first floor. There's some great stuff that went on in that room. Over here, here's the hill that, you know, one day I was wearing a dashiki shirt, which I was very into back then, and I would do somersaults down the hill. I might have had some cocktails that afternoon at that point.
Did you know that you were entering this crazy party atmosphere that you'd be?
No, even though I was told I was, I had no expectation that it could really exist.
The best recruiting tool we could have for an engineer was to bring him over to one of our parties.
Hey, what's happening, people? Hey, how's it going?
And they felt, hey, I'm a nerd. There are girls here. They're talking to me. It's good.
That was the culture. These guys are the lifeblood of the business, and they do what they want to do. And that's fine.
In some ways, things happened to me over the course of 3.5 years here that made the next 25 years really tough, because it established a standard of what professional life and life in general could be. And I never let go of the thought that my life could still be this or better. I just didn't know how to do it. It's really intense for me to come back here. This is the first time I've been back here in 30 years. And this was the place where I was introduced to what life could be for me. What a working life could be, what real creative satisfaction could be, what doing something really meaningful could be. Those are all things that come back to me in this moment. It's very intense.
So what really happened back in 1983? People heard the rumors, but Atari denied the dump ever took place. And eventually people forgot about it. But with the growth of the internet and all of its best and worst lists, E.T. and its burial went from small-town gossip to full-blown urban legend. By the mid-90s, videos began to appear online that seemed to suggest that anyone with a shovel could go out in the desert and dig up the buried games. That's what I thought too, but it wasn't close to that easy. Joe had spent years researching the burial. If his information was correct, the games were not only deep underground, they were covered with concrete. Joe was still wading through a sea of red tape, but if and when the city approved his plan to excavate the landfill, he was going to need more than just a shovel. He would need giant yellow digging machines and a bunch of guys in hats and vests to operate them.
This is one of the photos of the actual burial when they did it. So we're looking at like 15 feet down to hit the concrete. Under the concrete's mostly dirt. It's just it's the bottom of the pit.
What's that thing right over there?
That's a motor grader.
A motor grader?
Yes. That's for really just fine grading, you know, like the highways and roads, and fine planing large areas.
So we conceivably might need that for this, right?
No.
I mean, but you could bring it out before, right? I mean, you might want to park it there so it's ready.
No, not really.
Oh.
No,
we're fine.
I don't know. Not my field.
I am concerned that Joe's moving kind of quick, and we do need to throw some brakes on and slow it down.
The opposition comes from environmentalists, maybe within the community, and the concern is that Alamogordo also may have something else buried in the landfill that may be hazardous, and we may not know exactly where this location is.
Nobody really and truly has dead honest records as to where everything is buried out there. And we're talking potential mercury-laced pigs, malathion, possibly DDT. There's potentially lead in there, maybe some other dangerous metals that are in those cartridges. I don't want to be in an area where we might crack open a sealed tomb, so to speak, of these hogs where mercury gas comes out. So I don't want the Stephen King novel of we hit the wrong spot and all of a sudden we are evacuating Alamogordo. That is unacceptable to me.
If there's a problem that the New Mexico Environmental Department perceives, we're not going to be able to proceed.
Until I'm satisfied it's safe, it's not going to happen, at least within my power. You know, there's only so much power that I have.
So for my first game, they wanted me to do a coin-op conversion. Although I had only been there for about a week, I went to my manager and I said, you know something? I said, this game, Star Castle on the 2600, is just going to suck. I know it's going to suck. And I said, but I think I can take some of the key things that I think make it a fun game and rework it so that it would work on the 2600. And so they said, okay, go ahead, do what you want to do.
So how did you learn how to program a game?
I just read the manual and started writing the game. No one had ever done like a backstory for a game before. And I thought, this is my first game, and I want to be involved in every part of it. I want to make it the best thing it could possibly be. So I wrote this like 7, 8 page story. I stayed up all night just writing this story, knocked it out. And it was a science fiction story about flies that get on the first interstellar spaceships and mutate and evolve and take over the solar system. But now they're under attack by this other monster and stuff. And that's a short version of the story. So I thought, well, I need to name it. So what I did was I named it Yar because that's Ray spelled backwards. And Ray Kazar was the CEO of Atari. Right, so I've got his name keyed into the title. And I thought revenge, great action word, you know, so that's compelling. And so that's how it became Yars' Revenge.
When Yars' Revenge came out, it was a hit. It was huge.
Games that could look like Yars' Revenge looked, that could draw that kind of stuff, were like magical. Even though Yars' Revenge might look primitive, you know, it looks like the superconducting super collider compared to a lot of the games that were out there at the time.
I remember the first time I put the cartridge and I was like, what is this? It really is a very innovative shooter of that era.
Getting a ship to fly around so it's fun just to fly the ship around is a trick, especially on that hardware. The enemy was cool and scary, and it felt really good to defeat it. You feel like it's your victory when you beat those challenges, and you feel like it's your defeat when they beat you. And you will keep coming back because you didn't lose by being cheated. You didn't lose because the game did something unfair. You lost because you weren't quite good enough. And all of the great games sit right on that edge.
I remember playing Yars' Revenge one day, and we happened on this trick that let you, if you were on this right spot at the right time in the game, and it was in between levels, these initials came up. The initials were HSW. To us, it was some weird mystery, like we had to figure out what HSW meant. And finally, in one of the game magazines, they published what HSW meant. Turns out HSW means Howard Scott Warshaw, the guy who made the game.
Yars' Revenge was the first game that Atari ever did where the programmer's name went out with the cartridge. Yars' Revenge had a lot of firsts, and that was just one of them.
Yars' Revenge is the best-selling original game for the Atari 2600. It sold something like 1 million copies. Every reviewer at the time thought Yars' Revenge was one of the best games Atari put out. You know it made a lot of money for Atari.
In 1981, this is a company that made operating profits of something like $375 million.
One of today's greatest marketing triumphs in the entertainment field is video games.
It was beyond comprehension, the fastest growing company in American history. This was an explosion. Even those of us who were in the middle of it were shaking our heads going, oh my God, this is amazing. We were the most successful coin-op company. We were the dominant consumer company. And we sat around literally saying to ourselves, what are the categories of games? What are the capabilities of the 20th century? Where is this industry going?
Everything that Joe has put together on this Atari graveyard so far seems to be coming true.
I'm in favor of the Atari games being dug up because it is the largest myth in the gaming world.
I believe that Joe just thinks it'd be an outstanding event for Alamogordo and a way to get us on the map.
On Tuesday, Alamogordo's City Commission approved a deal to dig in the old landfill within the next 6 months.
The city has given its okay, and now the state has given them approval.
Film crews will be in Alamogordo.
The documentary film crew will start probing the dump for their strange buried treasure at 9:30 a.m.
So this is an impressive looking machine out here. What the hell is it doing?
What this drilling rig does goes down, straight down, takes out core samples and brings up whatever's in the ground. We've narrowed it down from 300 acres down to about 5 to 10 acres. And so what we're doing now is trying to get it even closer. Because we're looking for things like somebody's mail, you know, the postmarks, newspapers, things like that, looking for dates. Because we're looking for September of '83.
Don't you think people are going to be disappointed if we dig it up and we don't actually find the ET games? I mean, wouldn't that be...
That would be very disappointing for all of us, all the work, 3 years of work put into this.
So what do we do then? You're just going to dig up the whole landfill or something?
No, we can't. The Environment Department will not allow that to happen.
You're saying that there's a possibility that this could turn out to be a giant waste of time.
I think I said it before. I'll bet the car, I won't bet the house.
Most everybody, at least in the Western world, has played a video game of some kind. They've gone to an arcade. They know the Atari brand. They certainly know E.T. And so I think there's a universal curiosity about this game. You know, something did happen those couple of nights in 1983 that I think it merits serious investigation.
So why did I decide to go to Alamogordo? I'm very much interested in the impact that a particular game or an industry has made within a cultural and social context. What's striking about the Atari ET game in the Alamogordo landfill is that they're there and not in museums. I think this is what excites many people who keep this narrative alive, is they want to get these items. They want visible proof. They want some kind of tangible evidence that that dump did take place.
I've been professionally making games since about '94, but more than that, I'm somebody who's been chiefly doing a lot of historical work with video games, trying to preserve video games and get people to understand that video games are more like art. And so I've been doing a lot of video game preservation and education. I always thought one day I'm going to go over there and I'm going to see finally once and for all like where it's buried. I almost don't even really need to know what's in it. I almost want to keep that mystery alive. To me, under that landfill is actually the burial site of an entire industry, because what affected Atari at the time affected everyone. And everything that I thought was going to go on forever stopped. And it stopped almost at that same moment that whatever's there was buried. So for me, I want to find out what is there. It's like opening the Ark of the Covenant. It's like, you kind of want to look, but is my face going to melt off? I don't know. I have told my wife that I will be going to New Mexico. And she asked me why, and I started to explain, and she said, I don't need to know. You just go do it.
You want it Ernest on screen?
Whatever. Ernest is my fancy writer name. Ernie is what everybody calls me.
All right, so we'll use your writer's name. How would you describe yourself?
Screenwriter, novelist, gentleman adventurer. The thing about having an Atari for me was it was a simulator. Like, I could simulate being Indiana Jones or simulate being E.T. Having access to that and coming from a family of like modest means and not having to, beg for quarters and just be able to play as much as you wanted, that was such a huge part of my childhood and fed my imagination. And that was the inspiration for Ready Player One, my novel. The idea of like, what if Willy Wonka had been a video game designer and he held his golden ticket contest inside his greatest video game creation. And that all came from finding those Easter eggs in all those Atari games. I felt like a little kid this past week, like getting ready to go to camp. Alamogordo and the Atari graveyard, for me it's like holy ground. And that was when I realized my DeLorean's already in New Mexico. I just have to fly to Santa Fe, pick up my DeLorean from George R.R. Martin, who was using it for the Back to the Future screening, and drive it down to Alamogordo. I could stop at the Very Large Array, also hit Roswell, and then go to Alamogordo and be there for the excavation of the Atari graveyard. As soon as those tumblers clicked into place, I'm like, the most epic road trip of all time, I have to go. It's like I'm Indy going to Westeros to meet Doc Brown and then save E.T.
Boom. Have a great drive and a great time in that.
George, thank you so much. I appreciate it, man.
My pleasure.
There it is. This is a good piece of evidence because right here.
Is that the date right there?
Right there. You got Sunday, October 2nd, 1983 right there.
That's good, right?
Yeah, Atari was from the 23rd to the 29th of September.
So this is like a week later.
Well, it's not even a week. It's like 2 or 3 days later.
Well, I'm not that good at math.
The Ataris would have been on the bottom, then garbage from the following weeks would have been piled on top.
Right. So where are the games?
This is the following week.
In here?
No games yet.
No Atari stuff at all?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
I love the challenges. I love the mystery. I love the especially when people say they'll never be found or they're not there. That just makes the challenge even better. I put 3 to 4 years of this research, planning, the politics, the environment department. I mean, many, many, many things to get to this point. Yeah, now it's very important that we find them.
So back in the early 80s, movie licenses for video games were just starting to come into vogue, and I think Raiders was the first one. So they needed someone to do Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think what happened was yours was very successful, and so they wanted me to do a big game, and then it was up to Spielberg. So when I went down and met with Spielberg, and if Spielberg would have said, I don't think he's really right for the game, they would have sent someone else.
Can Indiana Jones escape from the forces of evil? In Atari's Raiders of the Lost Ark adventure game.
What was the reception of the Raiders of the Lost Ark game?
It was another million seller. Raiders was huge. I mean, I can honestly say I'm the only programmer in the history of Atari where every one of my games that was released was a million seller. The word meteoric comes to mind.
And now,
Steven Spielberg brings us E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial.
Spielberg says, well, you know, my pictures, they open slow, and they build, and they hold, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I just looked at him, and I didn't know anything. I said, not this one. It was E.T. I said, it's gonna open huge, and it's gonna stay huge. Okay, the movie comes out, it's a huge hit, and we want to do the cartridge of it, okay?
You know, every time you try to take some kind of a property and move it into another medium for a pure profit motive, you get trouble. Specifically, with respect to games, you know, it's like, oh, you know, like, let's go see if we can exploit this movie as a game. You know, maybe we could make extra money out of a profitable franchise.
Now, there was a negotiation going on between the Atari people and the people at Universal about what we're gonna pay. And Steve Ross, who was the CEO of Warner, got in, and for whatever the reasons, he agrees to a deal that is so off the chart, nobody believes it. But he does it. It was $20 to $30 million. It was some crazy number. Steve Ross basically was trying to woo Steven Spielberg to come to work for Warner because he recognized that Spielberg was a genius. And that all plays into this story. Well, we acquired the rights to E.T., and we had to have the game out for Christmas. And that's a problem.
One afternoon, I'm sitting in my office, and a call comes in, and it's Ray Kazar, and he's calling from Monterey. So I take a call, and Ray Kazar comes on the phone, and he says, Howard, can you do E.T. in 5 weeks? And I said, yes, I can. And he goes, okay, in 2 days, I want you to be at San Jose Executive Airport. There'll be a Learjet waiting for you. Be on that jet. Be ready to propose the game to Spielberg. During that meeting, when I flew down on the Learjet to go meet Spielberg and present the game to him, even though I only had 5 weeks, I still wanted to innovate. So I proposed a 3D world that the game was going to take place on. And the huge scope of what I was trying to achieve, it walks that line between really trying to make something happen and venturing into the impossible and walking off a cliff. The emotionality of the game was supposed to come out through the interaction of the characters. You have the FBI agent who's interested in what you have. That's why the FBI agent just steals stuff that you were holding. You have the scientist who's interested in who you are. The scientist actually carries you back to the city because they want to study you. And Elliot comes in to save you. There's times where you can call Elliot and he will help you out. And so those are the kind of things that I had that I thought created possibly some sentiment. And at one point, Spielberg says to me, he goes, you know, couldn't you do something more like Pac-Man? No, Steven, we need to do a game that's fresh. We need to do something that's really worthy of this movie.
How simple you can make a complicated game. It's how complicated a game can you make subject to the constraint of easy learnability. My job is to produce a cartridge that is going to sell for Atari.
A typical VCS game at the time took 5 or 6 months, and this was going to be in 5 weeks. You might think, no, nobody can do a game in 5 weeks, like most people in the department would think. But I don't think that way. I think, yeah, I can do that. The word hubris comes to mind. I mean, whatever it is I might have been full of, I was overflowing with it at that point. Because if the game can't make the Christmas market, the game is a total waste. They're gonna miss their window. So that was the big thing. It was the $22 million bet that you could turn the game around in that time. I had a development station moved into my home, so I could be basically working on this game almost 24 hours.
We found that there was a good probability of success if we took a coin-operated game and just ported it over to a game that we could play on the VCS. E.T. didn't have that.
Hello? Somebody out there? E.T.? Video game?
It's the video game that lets you pretend you're E.T.
Okay, so the game's done, and one of the conditions I asked for was that Steven Spielberg is the one who approves the final game. So Steven Spielberg played the final game and approved it for release.
Howard, who is a certifiable genius, went off and about a number of weeks later came back with a concept and a game plan. And I was amazed at how
difficult it was, and yet at the same time, how much fun it was to play. Have you seen the latest update? I've seen the final game. Are you happy with it? Oh yeah, it's my favorite. Of course, I'm biased. I made the movie.
So Steven Spielberg thought it was okay, so I thought, all right, I'm good with that. And not that I'm blaming him for anything.
No, of course not.
But
it's his fault.
A video game that lets you help E.T. get home. Just in time for Christmas.
after E.T. was released, there was a great sense of relief that we'd actually made the schedule and everything was good. And then the game went out into market, and it was very high on the Billboard list, and again, things were good.
I got E.T., I think it was Christmas of 1982, if I remember correctly, and I thought it was like I was going to be the guy on the street who had E.T. before everybody else. Turns out everybody I knew got E.T. that Christmas.
After a while, people start going by me in the halls, people from other buildings, people from marketing and management, and they're saying things like, you know something, Howard? You did a great job. We don't blame you. That was really something what you did. You really came through for us there, and we don't want you to think we think anything else. This really isn't about you. Don't feel bad. It's okay. It's cool. And I'm thinking, like, what the hell are they talking about?
E.T. was a really hard game. It was the kind of game that was brutal, unfair, didn't make a lot of sense.
I grew up in London, and there was a video game store in my town that let you rent them. I don't know what the rental was, like 50 pence for a weekend, and I still remember feeling like I wasted my money because it was bad.
People aren't liking it, and people aren't liking it a lot.
And what made it particularly bad was my memory of the movie was so great. I love the movie. Everyone loved the movie when it came out. It's a great movie, still is a classic movie today. And so this massive chasm that existed between the quality of the movie and the quality of the game that it was based on, I think just made it seem that much more like a slap in the face.
Okay, well, maybe it won't sell 6 million, maybe it'll only sell 4 million or 3 million, that'll be okay. And then there's like returns. People are returning the game.
They made too many. How many they made, I don't even know.
They made like 4 million cartridges. That means there could be millions of carts coming back.
So what do you do with useless, worthless product? How do you get rid of it? Bury it. That's a pretty good answer.
Well, career change is not anything new for me. I've been through a number of different careers. I actually went and got a California real estate license and then a broker's license and did that for a while. I did that just long enough to know this was like the last thing in the world I wanted to do. And now I am a licensed practicing psychotherapist in California. And I'm a very unique therapist in that I have a master's of engineering and I also have a master of arts in counseling psychology. I mean, I'm the Silicon Valley therapist. I'm very good at translating between English and nerd. And this is the first time since I left Atari that I feel I'm doing what I really love doing. So it took me 30 years to get back to a place that I don't feel I'm a step down from where I used to work. And that's many, many different jobs. I know this dig is coming up, and I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be standing right there. And I am gonna literally watch my past being dug up. And that's a weird kind of thing to anticipate. My hopes are in one way, my expectations are another, and I don't know what it's gonna be. I really don't know what it's gonna be. I don't know what it's gonna mean to me if something comes up, if it's there.
Part of punk archaeology is that sense of community and the fact that we're helping each other out to address the issues that we're interested in. And most of the time we're doing it on a volunteer basis.
It's going to be interesting to see how they decide to excavate in order to clear a better area, so that we can get at more of the content that we need.
One of the people down there did confirm finding a Donnie and Marie poster.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Well, basically, because we're going to treat this as a salvage excavation, we will dig a trench We'll go through and excavate the material in the pits that we dig, at which point we'll send them up to the tables. We'll sort through the material, we'll weigh it, we'll count it, identify it, and yeah, that's the plan.
So what's happened so far today?
Basically, we've started digging on the hole, and the trucks have already started going through the train.
So just so people understand, and probably right now I'm cutting to an awesome diagram of this. There's like 20 feet of garbage that's on the top of wherever the games are buried.
Garbage and dirt.
Sorry, garbage and dirt.
Right.
In the diagram, it's going to be pretty clear. And so that all has to be taken away, right?
Yeah, we'll get the vast majority of the hole excavated out.
And so far, have we found anything and found any Atari games? Or?
No, nothing. Nothing.
Nothing yet. And son, I mean, you seem pretty nervous.
Right.
Are you?
Oh yeah, terrified.
Terrified, okay. I gotta be honest, I'm nervous as shit. I don't know if that'll help motivate you guys, but
yeah, that did it for us. Yeah. We need to get back to work, yeah.
Great, let's go.
Now that you've done that.
Go team, way to go. Son, calm down, buddy.
People say nerd or geek, I say enthusiast. I love things and I love people who love things. Like, if you just spend all your time focusing on all the amazing like art and entertainment that's being made, there's so much of it happening now you can't even take it all in. It's like The Dig. When I tell people, like the right kind of people about it, they're like, I can't believe that's finally happening and that you're gonna get to be there. You know, I get, look, goosebumps talking about it.
The local video game shop in Austin, Texas, Game Over Video Games, gave me every copy they had of every one of Howard's games. Little known fact, E.T. has the very first official video game Easter egg ever in a video game. Warren Robinette had the very first one in Adventure, but he did that without anybody knowing. Howard asked if he could put Easter eggs in the game, and Atari said yes. If you go find the geranium and you make the geranium regenerate, it turns into Yar from Yar's Revenge, and he flies away. The first time that happened to me when I was 11 years old, I shit myself. And then if you do it again, it turns into Indy from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Howard hid characters from this game and this game in this game.
Hello.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the lodge.
Well,
it's great to see you here.
Absolutely.
Great. Can I get the last name?
Warshaw. W-A-R-S-H-A-W.
Howard.
That's me. So it's the day of the actual dig, and my wife and I are in a van on our way to the landfill. It was a strange feeling. I mean, I was like nervous, and I didn't really understand why, but I just had this sense, just like a tingly thing, that something is going on here today. And as we pull into the landfill, there are already people there. And then there's more people, and we go on, and there's more people, and it just keeps going and going.
This sort of felt like a religious pilgrimage to me. I called up some friends, said, hey, can we get down there?
And I asked my brother-in-law if he wanted to go.
Heck, let's do it. Let's check it out.
And my wife said, whatever.
It's one of those weird, monumental video game-based events that only comes around once a century.
This is our generation's urban legend.
Billions of cartridges out in the desert.
Growing up, you always read little rumors about it.
And I grew up playing an Atari, which my babysitters had given me, and I actually had the E.T. game. My friend and I, she and I would actually just, for fun on the weekends, drive around trying to figure out where would these Atari games be buried. It was the fun of the legend. It's like looking for the Loch Ness Monster.
What did you think when you played the E.T. game last night?
It was awesome, because in my opinion, I like terrible games.
It come back and to relive the feeling I got off those games is something I couldn't pass up.
I just want to know about the urban myth, see if it's really buried out here.
I just came out here to be part of video game history. Had to see whether it's true or not. You have to be a special kind of nerd to be able to want to drive 28 hours for a video game.
The myth that E.T. the video game for the Atari 2600 was the worst video game of all time, it would be so great to debunk that because it's just not true. And also to redeem Howard Scott Warshaw because he's an amazing video game designer and his game was great.
Cool car.
Yeah, I like that. E.T.'s in there.
This morning, coming to a dump in a small town in New Mexico, there were people lined up waiting to get in. What's the last time you saw a line of people waiting to get into a dump? It totally took me by surprise, but in a delightful way.
You never go to a dump unless you're throwing something away, and here we are trying to find treasure, buried treasure.
I think they'll find something. The cartridges had to go somewhere. Why not here?
There is a lot of open space. Great place to dump a million cartridges.
There is a definite possibility that there is games.
This is archaeology for the time I grew up. So the nostalgia for anything that came out of that era is pretty high.
All right, now the wind is really picking up. On cue.
On cue.
The weather here in Alamogordo is awesome if you like sandstorms and an impending doom-filled cloud of white.
Whoa!
Oh, this is getting brutal.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is brutal.
It's getting very windy.
Basically what's happening is the white sands are blowing in from white sands and covering everything, and it's really shitty.
They're saying this is like a historic wind.
Really?
Today, that's what somebody told us. Yeah.
To think that we're in the middle of a sandstorm, really, this is what's going on. And for me, it was almost like the big sandstorm right at the opening of Close Encounters. The people wearing the goggles and the bandanas, everybody's like gathered around because they found something and they can't believe what they found.
Oh, we're the first! This is Tony Johnson from Denver, Colorado, who ran up to me in my DeLorean. He's like, I found something. And Tony is gonna go down in history because he found the first evidence of Atari hardware.
Whoa, that's
right
pretty
there.
huge.
Right there it is, my man.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an announcement. So Tony, tell us what you just found.
An Atari 2600 joystick top.
So Tony, where did you find it?
Walking to the bathroom.
So is a surface find?
Surface find. Yeah, like we know what a surface find is, right?
Well, surface find is just something, you're walking around, you're looking down on the ground, you see something interesting, you pick it up. It's totally out of archaeological context.
What are the odds that that like blew out of the hole?
I actually think that's pretty good. I mean, the wind is blowing fiercely in that direction. You know, the stuff's coming out of the bucket. You know, we've been finding a lot of interesting things that date from around that time.
Anything from Atari?
Nothing from Atari yet.
How can you authenticate this? Can you carbon date it?
No, it's much too recent for that.
There are really two things that we could be dealing with when taking a look at these cartridges if they're actually there. First thing is that they just loaded the trucks with these cartridges and then they dumped them. And that's the best possible scenario because you can pull them out and I bet you most of them will be playable. You know, they've just been in there for, you know, since 1983.
Trash bags, Stroh's beer cans, wood, tons of wood. We're right about where we need to be, but there's still no Atari detritus at all.
We've been here for a while already. It's tedious, the wind's horrible. We're wondering if they're gonna find anything or not.
It's like a nylon cord and a big red wrapper.
I don't think there's anything in that hole except rattlesnakes and scorpions. If it's buried, it's probably for a reason. It should stay buried.
I wasn't thinking that something was really messed up until late '83.
To me, Atari was never going to go away. It was this thing that was just part of my life, and the thought that there could ever be a day where there was no Atari, or no Atari 2600, never crossed my mind.
E.T. comes out, and E.T. is not so great, and somewhere toward the end of the year, I'm starting to wonder, are we making our numbers? Which leads to one of the worst nights of my life. On December 7th, 1982, I get a call from Dennis Groth, who was the CFO of Atari, and he says, Manny, here's the new budget. And it's a huge shortfall from what we had been told.
Warner Communications said today that its once booming Atari business lost another $180 million in the third quarter, for total losses this year of more than $500 million.
I was starting to see enough signs in the company that things were starting to unravel.
It was unraveling hard and fast, and we didn't have any ready solutions.
Several Atari executives, including Atari's chairman, Raymond Kassar, sold Warner stock shortly before the negative earnings announcement and the decline in the price of the stock. Kassar denies any wrongdoing or impropriety, but a number of stockholders have sued Warner.
So they got rid of Ray Kassar and they brought in a guy from Philip Morris, and when he came in, Atari had 10,000 employees, and within about 4 months or 5 months, Atari had 2,000 employees. I really got that we had lost 80% of our staff.
In the short run, the market is frequently irrational. In the longer run, hopefully it's rational.
The wild upside ride was over. I did not understand the extent of the downside ride that was coming.
This is slipping away. The train is derailing. It's not going to keep riding, and what am I going to do next?
It was a big emotional blow.
It was my baby, and I hated to see it abused.
New Media Magazine credited E.T. with destroying the video game industry. That's interesting. I think that's really interesting that I could be single-handedly responsible for toppling a billion-dollar industry.
E.T. comes out, the industry dies, Howard's associated with that, and I think that's affected his career and what people will remember him for, and that's pretty bad.
The fact that a guy's career got destroyed because he did E.T., given the circumstances surrounding doing E.T., it's completely unfair. I mean, it's sad. It's really sad.
There's this video game Walk of Fame. There's also this show called DICE where they give out Lifetime Achievement Awards. Howard's not in that. He's not put in that same group. They kind of keep him out of all these things, and it's kind of a shame.
The day I left Atari, when things really fell apart and it was over and I'm literally carrying my garbage out to my car to leave for the last time, that was a very depressing moment for me, because I felt I was losing the most important thing in my life. And I also knew it was so unreal that I'd never be able to recreate it.
The burial in Alamogordo is basically Atari's funeral.
The burial of those cartridges represents the burial of that beautiful era.
And that may be what's interesting about it. I don't know. I mean, that's a whole psychology I'm not going to go near. But it may be because it is about the death of Atari. That's what it is.
We can't control how the past returns to us. We may get something that no longer resembles an ET cartridge. We may get something monstrous, something twisted, something decayed. We may not even know what we're looking at if we unearth Atari's ET.
Part of me feels that when you finally crack open this place and you start to look, it's going to be a lot like the Ark of the Covenant. It's just going to be a bunch of sand. But another part of me hopes that what's found there is going to lead to a lot more understanding and a lot more discovery about what really happened.
Shit, you see what I see? What's his name?
Joe! Joe! What's that? What is that right there?
They want me to come in?
Let's go.
So what's up? You guys find something?
I should have brought my binoculars.
Can you show me?
They're bringing some stuff over to the archaeologist table right now. Let's see what's going on.
Can everybody hear me? We found something. The archaeologists have confirmed it's from 1983, 28 feet down.
It's E.T. the video game, intact, in its box.
It's an emotional event. They backed up this legend with fact, and it's incredible to be a part of it.
Good job, Joe.
I wasn't nervous till we got down to that where he was almost reaching his max land. But yeah, it was a big weight off my shoulders when that bucket came up and E.T. was there too.
Congratulations, dude.
Thank you.
I didn't think they were going to find them intact. I thought for sure they'd be crushed and ruined, but now I got goosebumps. And it's not because of the dust storms.
What's this moment like for you?
Look at all the excitement that's been generated today over something I did 32 years ago. It's an immensely personal thing. What it took to make these games was a lot. And this one was done in 5 weeks. That was one of the hardest 5 weeks of my life. So I need a little moment. And I'm just so excited to be here.
A lot of these people who are complaining about E.T. had never actually even played it. And ever since then, I would talk to people and they would talk about E.T. and I'm like, well, have you ever played the game? And it would come out that they didn't. They would just kind of continue this myth of the game being really horrible. It is a good game. It wasn't the worst that Atari had to offer. There were, I remember getting a game called Firefly. That is the worst game for Atari. That's what everybody should be focusing their efforts on, not E.T.
Let me be clear, the worst game ever made was obviously Trespasser. So I just want to be clear with that.
With the shitload of just horrible, poorly made, cranked out Atari games, to call E.T. the worst one is just shameful.
In contemporary game culture, we like trashing games. I don't mean putting them in landfills, but verbally, trashing game design. It's become fashionable to sort of regard E.T. as the worst video game of all time. In fact, it makes everybody's list as the #1. And I'm going to go out on a complete limb here and say, and maybe people will attack me for this, but I'd rather play Atari's E.T. than any Call of Duty.
You know, in context, given the time and the situation that Howard had to live in to program that game, it really is an astonishing masterwork.
If he made an amazing fucking game that's a whole self-contained world in 5 weeks, that's even more impressive.
I don't know any human being who could have turned E.T. in the time frames involved into a really successful game.
He should be applauded for being able to have done anything in the time that was allotted. The scorn should be heaped upon those who thought that it was even rational to try to build a cartridge in a month and a half.
The analogy that people always use for these first-timers, for people who try something first, is the first penguin analogy, where the first penguin who jumps down the hole through the ice is the one who invariably gets eaten by the seal. But if there wasn't a first penguin, then the penguins would be going down through the ice. So, sucks to be the first penguin, but somebody's got to do it.
So it turned out that Joe Lewandowski had been right all along. The games were buried, almost exactly where he had predicted, and no mercury-filled pigs popped up out of the ground. So the legend of the burial was true. Or was it? When the archaeologists cataloged all the games, there were a bunch of ET cartridges, but nowhere near the millions that were such a big part of the legend. In fact, E.T. made up about 10% of the total games found. The rest included some of the best games ever made: Defender and Centipede and Yar's Revenge. There was even one copy of Adventure, which I snagged. The burial wasn't a cover-up or done out of shame. It was a warehouse dump done by a company in financial distress. At the time, the Alamogordo landfill was just the most practical solution. E.T. wasn't buried because it was the worst game ever. People called it the worst game ever because it had been buried. And as a result, it got blamed for destroying an entire industry. The game and its creator had taken the rap for a crime they didn't commit.
The notion that E.T. caused the demise of Atari is simply stupid. It's just stupid.
Atari committed suicide. It was not homicide. And it wasn't the ET cartridge. It was a concomitant effect of a lot of missteps in technology, in deployment, in marketing.
So people say ET destroyed the video game industry, and I'm sure I've heard that before, but it's just really funny. No, the behavior pattern that created the conditions for the ET failure is what destroyed the video game industry.
The cause of the fall was Atari trying to sell yet another 10 million Atari 2600s into a market that was saturated.
E.T. didn't destroy Atari. It wasn't good, but it didn't destroy Atari. That's one of those things people say. And the reality of life is, if enough people say it, it becomes the truth for people.
A simple answer that is clear and precise will always have more power in the world than a complex one that is true.
Here's another ET six-pack.
What I would like to see happen is I would like to see whatever remains are recovered will then find their way into a museum in the service of game history.
Well, you know, the city of Alamogordo owns the games and what have you that came through there by virtue of the fact they're in our landfill. We might be able to sell them on eBay.
So if another terrible video game needed to be buried, would you be prepared to let it be buried in Alamogordo?
Absolutely. Come on down. We'll bury your game.
Atari was the first great consumer company to come out of Silicon Valley.
It was exciting. It was different. It was the first engagement that a generation had with computers.
So a generation grew up being introduced to the computer age by Atari games. We brought a whole massive new entertainment medium into public consciousness. So for a whole generation, we are the definition of the video game era. And it's cosmic.
These guys really never got their due for really starting the whole industry. 3 Lives was invented by a person. Flying a ship around was invented by a person who had to figure out what that was. And it was so good that it was copied everywhere. And because it was copied everywhere, and because it's so ubiquitous, it's impossible to remember why it was so special.
I think Atari's legacy is that we started the Silicon Valley ethic of engineers as rock stars. It didn't exist before. I think the casual culture, the meritocracy didn't exist before. I believe these are underpinnings of the things that made and continue to make Silicon Valley a special place in the world. And I think that Atari will continue to endure as an icon of innovation.